Kobe is praised as a legend, yet his image carries a shadow after a 2003 case where hidden footage reportedly showed him admitting wrongdoing, and the NBA worked to keep it concealed.
I sit here in front of you guys, furious at myself. So I sit at myself for making a mistake.
Kobe is praised as a global icon, but the truth behind his story is far more complicated. And the deeper you go, the more the polished version of his legacy begins to crack. That hidden footage is only one piece of a larger puzzle the NBA never wanted the public to examine. And the details surrounding it expose how far the league was willing to go to protect its most valuable asset. This entire scandal was powerful enough to destroy everything. Yet the NBA worked relentlessly to bury the reality beneath a mountain of highlight reels, tributes, and carefully crafted mythology. Behind the spotless image they presented, there existed testimony, evidence, and raw emotional moments that contradicted the narrative of a flawless hero. All of this traces back to Kobe Bryant's notorious 2003 criminal case in Eagle County, Colorado, the scandal that almost ended his career overnight and threatened to send him to prison for the rest of his life. The accusations, the court hearings, the emotional press appearances, every moment unfolded in front of millions, shocking the world and shaking the foundations of the NBA. But instead of preserving the truth, the league aimed to erase it, to make the public forget that their crown jewel had ever stood accused of a life-altering crime. The magnitude of what Kobe faced cannot be overstated. This wasn't a typical celebrity controversy that fades after a few news cycles. This was a criminal case carrying the possibility of life imprisonment, and it hit just as Kobe stood at the pinnacle of his career. At only 25, already a three-time NBA champion and widely seen as a future successor to Michael Jordan, he suddenly found himself fighting for everything: his freedom, his career, and his reputation. The footage at the center of this controversy gained power because of its context. The NBA had just come out of the post-Jordan void and desperately needed a new global superstar. They had invested heavily in the Kobe Shaq era, the Lakers' brand, and the promise of continued dominance. Their future marketing, revenue, and global expansion depended on Kobe. Then, without warning, he was facing charges that could destroy the entire vision and send one of the league's brightest stars to prison. Instead of publicly condemning him or suspending him, the NBA made a calculated decision to remain silent, choosing business over morality. Kobe continued playing, selling jerseys, filling arenas, and leading campaigns while serious legal proceedings were unfolding behind the scenes. This wasn't compassion. It was pure corporate strategy. The resurfaced footage showed Kobe breaking down, admitting adultery, crying as he apologized to Vanessa, yet still insisting he had not committed the crime he was accused of. It was a vulnerable, shattered version of Kobe that didn't align with the heroic image the NBA spent years manufacturing. That press conference, where he stood trembling behind a podium, exposed cracks in the carefully built facade. The same man who dominated the hardwood with absolute confidence now struggled to hold himself together as he read prepared statements, his hands shaking, the same hands that once lifted championship trophies. This contrast was something the NBA never wanted to highlight, and they spent years ensuring this chapter stayed locked behind the league's polished narrative.
Kobe Bryant is innocent of the charges that were filed against him today. He stands falsely accused of an extremely serious crime, a crime that carries with it the potential of a life sentence.
The legal strategy was clear from the start, with Kobe's team launching an aggressive defense that portrayed him as the true victim while accusing prosecutors of exaggerating the case for attention. Yet the most revealing part of the footage is the NBA's absolute silence as his lawyers battled to protect his image. That silence wasn't incidental. Internal reports and behind-the-scenes discussions from time, though never officially released, describe a league in full crisis mode as TV partners grew uneasy, sponsors reconsidered lucrative deals, and season ticket holders demanded clarity. Yet publicly the NBA pretended that a superstar facing possible life imprisonment was just another day, carefully acting disengaged to shield its billion-dollar brand. While Kobe's lawyers dismantled the prosecution's narrative and framed the entire case as a flawed, overblown attempt to gain publicity, the NBA subtly backed away, fearful of the damage this scandal could inflict on its most valuable player. The most striking moment unfolded when Kobe spoke for himself, a man whose entire identity revolved around control suddenly stripped of it, no longer dictating the game or shaping his public image, but forced into rare vulnerability, confronting a situation he couldn't overpower with skill or sheer determination.
I'm innocent. You know? I didn't force her to do anything against her will. I'm innocent. No. I'm not sitting here in front of you guys, furious at myself. Disgusted at myself for making a mistake of adultery. You know, I love my wife with all my heart. She's back.
This moment is one of the most psychologically revealing in the entire ordeal because Colby's words expose a built-in contradiction, a simultaneous claim of legal innocence and an admission of marital betrayal, creating narrative tension the NBA never managed to reconcile cleanly. The discomfort of the footage isn't just rooted in his vulnerability, but in the realization that this contradiction would define him for years, forcing the public to accept a version of Kobe who insisted he committed no crime, while openly acknowledging a moral failure that shattered his clean-cut image. The league recognized immediately that this duality made him impossible to market in the traditional sense, which is why they spent the following years constructing the Mamba mentality persona, an identity strong enough to coexist with the complexity of a man who was both a fearless competitor and deeply flawed. Kobe asked fans to trust his innocence even as he admitted to betraying his wife, his vows, and the polished image that had helped sell countless jerseys worldwide. This dual image, the heroic athlete paired with the imperfect man, is exactly the type of footage the NBA wants erased because it disrupts the myth they worked so hard to build. Even the staging of the press conference reveals the league's calculated strategy, placing Kobe behind a podium that physically separated him from the public while his lawyers flanked him to provide legitimacy and restrict any unplanned confessions. Everything was arranged to project order and control, yet his trembling voice exposed a man in turmoil, contradicting the polished facade the NBA needed to maintain. This is where the hypocrisy becomes glaring. The league continued to market Kobe as the embodiment of greatness, pushing merchandise and highlight packages to global audiences, all while desperately burying the darkest chapter of his life. They wanted the world to celebrate the 81-point game, not the court hearings, to worship the Mamba mentality, not recall the mugshots. The contrast becomes even sharper when you consider what was happening in his professional life during the same period. Despite navigating criminal charges and admitting adultery, Kobe was still piling up elite performances, averaging 24 points per game in the 2003-04 season, and convincing some analysts that the immense pressure actually pushed the competitive fire even higher. The NBA quickly capitalized on this angle, promoting the idea that basketball itself was Kobe's redemption and shifting the public narrative away from the unresolved issues that threatened the entire foundation of his legacy.
It's been nearly a decade now since, what you went through in Eagle with sexual assault, dismissed. To what extent do you think having gone through that, it had a positive impact on you and really made you better long term?
And you kind of had to do some soul searching because you're fighting numerous battles at the same time. And you're just kind of trying to figure your way through all of this mess.
This interview, conducted years after the trial, exposes more about the damage the scandal inflicted on Kobe's psyche than anything he ever said during the case itself. And what stands out just as sharply as his words is the way the interviewer frames the entire ordeal as if criminal charges were some kind of character-building milestone rather than traumatic, reputation-shattering crisis. A tone that perfectly reflects the NBA's preferred method of sanitizing and repackaging controversy into palatable narrative arcs. Even the language is carefully engineered, with the charges described simply as dismissed, avoiding any discussion of the complicated, controversial circumstances that ended the case. And this kind of semantic framing mirrors the NBA's long-term strategy of selective truth management, pushing people to remember the resolution while erasing the accusations, focusing on Kobe's supposed personal growth while ignoring the harm endured by others. Kobe's journey from global icon to global pariah and eventually back to icon status came at a psychological cost he openly acknowledged, admitting that the darkest chapter of his life forced him to confront the reality that he no longer controlled his own fate, a devastating realization for someone whose entire identity was built around control, dominance, discipline, and absolute mastery over every variable in his world. The criminal case was the first moment in his adult life when talent, determination, and resources couldn't dictate the outcome, and this loss of control fundamentally changed not only how he played basketball, but how he approached every part of his existence. What makes this even more unsettling is how the NBA exploited that psychological transformation for branding, turning the post-scandal version of Kobe into the Mamba persona, a hardened, colder, ruthlessly disciplined figure who had survived the abyss, and marketing that darkness as inspiration while sidestepping the unresolved moral complexities beneath it. As Kobe endured humiliation, public scrutiny, and internal collapse, his family absorbed the emotional fallout. Yet the NBA's public posture remained pure silence with no suspensions, no investigations, no statements, because the league wanted to preserve Kobe's financial value while avoiding accountability for their refusal to act. The numbers made their decision easy. Despite an initial dip, Kobe's jersey sales rebounded within months. Lakers' TV ratings rose during the trial out of curiosity and voyeurism, and the NBA learned that with enough control of the narrative, controversy could be monetized almost as effectively as heroism, shaping how the league would handle future scandals. Meanwhile, Kobe's household was crumbling under the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and relentless intrusion, and the human cost extended far beyond the star athlete. The footage from that era shows a family being suffocated by pressures they never sought. The NBA's refusal to intervene wasn't just about shielding Kobe, but about preserving the myth they had constructed around him, no matter who suffered in the process. In a single moment, Vanessa Bryant went from a private young woman to an unwilling participant in one of the most public scandals in sports history, thrust into the spotlight with no preparation, no desire for fame, and no real choice. When she stood beside Kobe at press conferences, the NBA viewed her presence not as support, but as strategic optics meant to calm sponsors, reassure fans, and stabilize the brand, transforming a real person into a symbol of forgiveness and unity. This manipulation represents one of the most cynical elements of the league's response, turning a woman barely in her 20s into a PR asset, using her to suggest family stability, while their star faced criminal charges. Her situation was impossible. Leaving Kobe would make her appear disloyal and potentially validate the accusations, while staying open to judgment as naive or complicit. And the NBA clearly preferred the version where she stayed because it kept the Kobe myth intact and financially useful. In the end, the league positioned itself to profit from Kobe's turmoil while his family endured the emotional wreckage, and the entire structure of narrative control, economic calculation, and moral ambiguity reveals how deeply the NBA protected its investment at the expense of truth, accountability, and the very people caught in the crossfire.
I love my wife with all my heart. She's backbone. You're a blessing. You're a beat to my heart. You're the air I breathe. You're the strongest person I know. I'm so sorry. Having to put you through this, having to put our family through.
The staging of this moment exposes exactly where the NBA's loyalty was directed, with Kobe placed front and center to dominate the frame, while Vanessa sat rigid beside him. Clearly uncomfortable and reduced to a prop meant to visually signal forgiveness the league desperately needed audiences to accept. Her micro-expressions in that clip, pain, tension, forced composure, and the unmistakable discomfort being pushed into a role she never chose, tell the real story the NBA hoped people wouldn't notice, as they focus on Kobe's emotional apology instead of the woman being used as a human shield to protect his reputation. On camera, it looked like contrition. Off camera, it was evidence that Kobe's actions had blown apart at home, and the league shrugged because her suffering was just collateral damage in their effort to keep him generating revenue. The manipulation didn't stop at the press conference, as the NBA's PR machine spent weeks engineering the illusion of a united couple, arranging photo ops, timing public appearances, and tightly controlling interviews to maintain the facade of marital stability. Vanessa's pain became a commodity, with broadcasts repeatedly cutting to her reactions during games, turning her into an unwilling symbol of loyalty and using her attendance as indirect proof of Kobe's innocence. Even their young daughters were dragged into the chaos, living in a home overwhelmed by cameras, lawyers, and relentless stress, but the league never acknowledged any of this because it clashed with the story they were selling. When Vanessa eventually forgave Kobe, the terms made obvious how deep the damage went, especially when reports surfaced of the $4 million purple diamond ring he bought her, the so-called apology ring, a gesture that made forgiveness look not just emotional but transactional. For the NBA, this was perfect, a clean redemption arc that smoothed over the scandal with luxury and symbolism. But in reality, the ring wasn't healing anything. It was a temporary patch on a relationship still deeply fractured, a glamorous distraction the league embraced because it reinforced a narrative they wanted while ignoring the human cost buried underneath.
I mourn, I cry, just like everybody else. And I sit here before you guys, embarrassed and ashamed for committing adultery.
This confession stands as one of the most vulnerable moments ever captured in sports. Yet has been largely erased from mainstream retellings of Kobe's career because of raw emotion in his voice, the strain in his expression, and the admission of shame are all details the NBA's polished mythology could never absorb. His choice of the phrase, "I mourn," signals grief not only for his marriage, but for the image he believed he embodied and the future he thought he controlled, turning the apology into a eulogy for the version of himself that existed before Eagle County, a version the league quickly buried beneath highlight reels because his death of innocence was impossible to market, and the footage showing Kobe stripped of his gladiator persona brought a haunting clarity that shattered the illusion of invincibility for millions of young fans who suddenly had to confront the idea that their hero was fallible, prompting the NBA to immediately shift toward redemption narratives rather than accountability because they feared the long-term damage to their brand. Yet no spin and no diamond could undo the humiliation Vanessa endured, and when she filed for divorce in 2011 citing irreconcilable differences, the league's PR machine scrambled to contain the fallout because Kobe had become an international symbol and they couldn't risk messy family drama damaging the carefully crafted image. But anyone looking beneath the surface could see that the divorce filing was a delayed detonation of trauma that had been building since 2003, a result of wounds the NBA hoped would simply disappear with time, even though the reconciliation that followed the scandal had always carried a transactional undertone, with reports suggesting the couple never fully addressed the core issues, instead relying on money, image management, and public pressure to maintain an illusion of unity that began to crack as Kobe aged and became less central to the league's marketing strategy. And this collapse exposed just how much of their public harmony had been built for the NBA's benefit rather than their own healing, revealing the darker truth that Vanessa, who had been only 21 when the scandal erupted, had been thrust into a global firestorm she was far too young to navigate, forced to watch the world dissect her husband's guilt and her personal dignity while being positioned by the league as a supporting character in Kobe's redemption arc. Treated like a stabilizing prop for a billion-dollar asset rather than human being. Her youth made her especially vulnerable, lacking the life experience, legal grounding, and emotional preparation required to understand how she was being used by a system that prioritized profit over people, turning her into a symbol of forgiveness to calm sponsors and reassure fans without any regard for the long-term psychological cost of carrying a role she never consented to. And this exploitation forms one of the clearest indictments of how the NBA handled the entire scandal, prioritizing narrative control over moral accountability at every stage.